Hello everybody, it's Zach here from realestatelicensewizard.com. Today's a special day. Today we're going to do a full real estate exam crash course in under 1 hour. That's right, our final runtime should be around 45 minutes. I'm going to try and cover as much real estate exam related content and information as possible into this single video. A couple things I want to go through before we get started. One, these topics will be featured on the national portion of the exam. So yes, this video is good in all 50 states. Two, you can follow along in many different ways. I recommend grabbing a paper and pencil and jotting down things as you go. Or feel free to just listen to me all the way through, whatever works for you. Three, all this information is located on our website, realestatelicensewizard.com. If you want to study at your own pace, go through our highly rated prep course, all that good stuff, check out the link on that down below. Four, if you're new to this channel, please consider subscribing for more real estate exam related stuff. That way you can pass the exam no problem. All right, without further ado, let's jump right into it. So to start off, we're going to review some basics. By now, you should be able to define a real estate agent, a broker, and a realtor. If not, we're going to go through that real fast and the difference. So one, a real estate agent is a professional who has passed the required real estate classes and licensing exams in the state where he or she intends to work. You may also see this on test as a salesperson or a licensee. Two, you should know what a broker is. The key thing to remember is a broker can can work independently or employ other agents. The biggest difference between a broker and a real estate agent is a broker can work on his or her own, while an agent must work under a licensed broker. And lastly, what is a realtor? Well, a realtor is a real estate agent who is a member of the National Association of Realtors. Remember, this is super important. Remember, just because someone is a real estate agent does not mean they are a realtor. The terms realtor and real estate agent, although commonly used interchangeably, are actually two different titles. That's so important. I have to stress that enough because you will get caught up all the time on the exam. They flip-flop them to try and trick you. So again, remember those three terms. Remember the difference between an agent, a broker, and realtor. And of course, I must mention that these terms may vary slightly depending on what state you live in, but for the most part, it's going to be this. All right, so more basics include supply and demand. Demand refers to how much of a product or service is wanted by buyers. Supply represents how much the market can offer. It's important to remember what supply and demand functions like a scale. So if one side rises, the other will lower, and vice versa. Now, while we're going on the topic of that, it's also important to talk about market participants or real estate market participants. So I'm going to go ahead and just skip through this section. You can pause here and read through it, but for time's sake, I'm just going to go ahead and get through this. But this is super important, so make sure you read through these a couple different times and memorize these. All right, one last important topic to cover in our real estate basics section is real estate itself. What is real estate and what makes it so unique? Well, as you should know, real estate is a form of real property. Don't worry, we're going to cover real property and personal property a little bit later. But real estate is unique because it has a set of characteristics that you must know for the exam. Now, these characteristics include both physical characteristics as well as economic characteristics. So these are the physical characteristics, should be on your screen now. So you can see here there's indestructibility, which is meaning land cannot be destroyed or worn out. Its appearance may be altered, but is almost always continues to exist. Immobility, meaning geographical location of the property remains the same and can never be changed. It is in a fixed position. And then uniqueness, meaning no parcels of real estate are exactly alike. So those are all the physical characteristics. Now let's take a look at the economic or other characteristics. So there's scarcity, meaning the total supply is fixed. Land is not limitless. There's improvements, also known as modifications, meaning improvements to a piece of land can either have a positive or a negative impact on its value. And then, of course, there is permanence of investment, meaning investments in real estate are long term. Since real estate transactions are complex and lots of money is involved, transactions are not made very frequently. Then there's location or area preference, meaning people's preference for a specific area. Things such as history, convenience, and reputation an area may have. That all makes real estate unique. All right. So now that we covered the basics, let's jump into property ownership. So owning real estate carries with it a bundle of legal rights. These are so important. So listen up. The bundle of rights is a right of possession, the right of control, the right of exclusion, the right of enjoyment, the right of disposition, and yeah, I think that's those. Yeah. So when a person purchases property, he or she is given the rights to the property. Interestingly, the rights can be split up and given to parties. Think of the bundle of rights like a bundle of sticks. So what exactly are these rights and what do they do? Well, let's break that down. So I listed them earlier. You can see here, these are all the rights. So let's start off with the right of possession. So this just means the property is owned by whoever holds the deed or title. This one's pretty simple. Once you close a real estate deal for cash and you have the title in your hand, it's yours. Then there's the right of control, which according to the law, the owner controls the use of the property. This just means that the title holder has the ability to manage the use of the property in any means deemed legal within the jurisdiction in which the property exists. And then there's the right of exclusion, which means others can be excluded from using or entering the property. So in plain terms, you don't have to allow anyone to enter your own property. Obviously, there are some exceptions there, like law enforcement and the government, things like that. And then there's the right of enjoyment, which is just means the owner can enjoy the use of the property in any legal manner and participate in any activities he or she finds pleasurable while on the property. This just means as an owner, you could be as loud as you want and pretty much do whatever you want as long as it's not against not against the law or local ordinances. And then there's the right of disposition, which just means the title holder can sell, rent, or transfer ownership at will. Lastly, that right is just saying whoever holds the title or whoever holds title can sell, rent, or transfer whenever they want, either permanently or temporarily to another party. Now we have to cover real and personal property. So I mentioned it a little bit earlier. Real property is all things attached to the land and all the legal rights to it. Personal property is all things removable. Quick, let's do an interactive activity. So I'm going to give you guys 15 seconds to come up with an example of real property and an example of personal property. Ready, go. All right, so I gave you guys about 15 seconds. What did you guys come up with? Well, hopefully you guys came up with some right answers and some good examples. So here are some examples. I'm going to list some for you. So real property examples are houses, garages, in-ground pools, and some business-related items like stables and farms. Personal property are things like clothes, maybe lawnmowers, couches, TVs, furniture. So do you see the difference? All right, next, let's talk about surface, subsurface rights, air rights, and water rights. So, surface rights are the rights to use the surface of the earth. Subsurface rights are the rights to use natural resources lying below the earth's surface. Interestingly, an owner may transfer rights without transferring the subsurface rights. For example, a landowner can sell his rights to an oil and gas company in his land, but still can own the land itself. All right, so next we're going to be talking about air rights and water rights. So let's break those down. Air rights are the rights to use the space above the earth. Water rights are the rights to use rivers, lakes, or oceans that fall adjacent to the land. Riparian rights, skipped a section. Water rights are divided into two categories, riparian and littoral. Riparian rights are those rights and obligations adjacent to watercourses such as navigatable streams and rivers, whereas littoral rights are the landowner's claim to use that body of water bordering his or her property as well as the use of the shore area. Water rights are appurtenant, meaning they run with the land and not the owner. I'm going to repeat that again because it's so important. Water rights are appurtenant, meaning they run with the land and not the owner. All right, now a good way to remember the difference between riparian and littoral is to remember riparian is in relation to rivers, while littoral is in relation to lakes. Say it with me, guys. Riparian rivers, littoral lakes, littoral lakes. That's an easy way to remember that one. So hopefully you guys get that. Say it a couple times, and I'm sure you'll remember it and never forget it. All right, next we're going to talk about forms of real estate ownership. Obviously, you need to know what types of real estate ownership there are and how they function for the exam. So let's just break those down. Okay, so ownership can be broken down in a bunch of different separate ways. First, there are two that dictate a lot. So I'll go through these first. So there's the ownership and severalty. Ownership and severalty means one owns the property. And then there's co-ownership. So co-ownership is when title to property, or I'm sorry, title to one parcel of real estate is held by two or more individuals. Those parties are called co-owners or concurrent owners. Individuals may co-own property as tenants in common, joint tenants or tenants by the entirety, or lastly, community property. So let's talk about the different forms of co-ownerships. So I started to kind of explain that a little bit earlier. So there's tenants in common. Tenants in common is when a parcel of real estate is owned by two or more tenants. Upon the death of a tenant, that share is transferred to the estate or heir of the deceased tenant. And then there's joint tenancy or joint tenant, which is when a property is owned by joint tenants. The interest of a deceased owner automatically gets transferred to the remaining survivors. Do you see the difference there? So to create a joint tenancy, the co-owners must share 4 unities. So these are important to know. So there's time, title, interest, and possession. But yeah, just remember those 4 and that they go with joint tenancy. And as I mentioned, remember the difference in which is deceased and which is not, and whether their rights go to whom and to what. Those are the key things that you need to start thinking about. All right. Now that's going to be it for basic types of ownerships. Heads up though, there are a few other forms of ownerships like community property and tenants by the entirety, but those are state specific. So make sure to check out our site or other videos for that. All right. Also, you need to know about timeshares, cooperatives, and condominiums and the difference. A timeshare is a property with a divided form of ownership or use rights. Those properties are typically resort condominium units in which multiple properties hold rights to the use of the property, and each of the owner of the same combination is allotted their period of time. So then there's a condominium, or often shortened to condo. This is a type of living space which is similar to an apartment, but which is an independently sellable and therefore regarded as real estate. So it's an independently sellable piece of property and therefore regarded as real estate. And lastly, there's a cooperative or a co-op, which is essentially a non-profit corporation, complete with board of directors, and each resident is a shareholder. Do you see the difference between those? So the big thing to remember is a co-op owner has a contract or a lease that allows the owner to occupy the unit, while a condo owner owns the unit. A co-op owner does not own the unit. Super important. I'm going to say that one more time. So while a condo or a condominium owner owns the unit, a co-op or a cooperative owner does not own the unit. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Now let's talk about trusts. All right. Let's talk about trust, guys. So trusts can be created during an individual's lifetime, or they can be established following someone's death. A trust is a 3-party relationship in which the first party, the trustor or the settlor, transfers a property upon the second party for the benefit of the third party, the beneficiary. So a land trust, which is different than a regular trust, a land trust is a legal agreement in which a property owner transfers title to the property or transfers title to a property to a trustee. The property owner is typically the beneficiary and directs the trustee in all matters relating to the management of the property. And that's going to be all outlined in a trust agreement or deed. Now, the property owner also retains all property rights, included the freedom to develop, rent, and sell the property. Now, one of the main advantages of this type of trust is the actual property owner can remain anonymous. Land trust can not only bring some legal protection, but can also help the property owner negotiate prices if he or she is wealthy. So next we have to cover business ownerships. And you might be wondering, why do I need to know business ownerships? Well, you need to know how they affect property ownership. So the 5 most popular types of businesses are sole proprietorship, general partnership, limited partnership, corporation, an LLC, or a limited liability company. So let's bust these out real fast. So for starters, a sole proprietor. Well, a sole proprietor may purchase property for both personal and business use through his or her name through the name of the business. However, only personal property used in direct relation to business operations is viewed as tax-deductible business expenses. So next is partnerships. So for partnerships, they may purchase property for both personal and business uses through his or her name or through the name of their business, same as sole proprietor. Now, this is when things get a little bit different. So try and listen up here. So when we're going over corporations, they're completely different. So a corporation has certain rights, privileges, and liabilities beyond those of partnerships or sole proprietorships. Doing business as a corporation has its advantages and disadvantages. But because a corporation is a legal entity, it can purchase property. Again, now let me explain the distinction between that. So the corporation is actually owning the property. When we're talking about a sole proprietor, if they have a business, the business can't actually own the property. It's the person itself that owns the business. Does that make sense? So there's a difference there, and that's super important to know. So lastly, there's LLCs. So the structure of LLCs vary from state to state, but an LLC is a hybrid legal entity that has certain characteristics of both a corporation and a partnership or sole proprietorship. So LLCs can own property, and in fact, some regular people prefer owning property under an LLC, so they have more legal protections on their property. Some people actually create LLCs just to buy property. Now, for the sake of our lesson today and what's on the exam, I'll keep it at that about business structures, but I encourage you guys, if you're unfamiliar with this kind of stuff, to look it up and read up on it for the exam. Next, we have to talk about leases and estates. So let's start with estates. How do estates work and what are they? Well, estates can be divided into two sections: freehold estates and less than freehold estates. A freehold estate is an estate in which you have an exclusive right to enjoy the possession of a property for an undefined length of time. Now, there are three types of freehold estates you need to know. So there's the fee simple absolute, there's the fee simple defeasible, and then a life estate. So let's break those down real fast. So a fee simple absolute, or a fee simple for short, is the highest form of real estate ownership that is recognized by law. That's the best one. So a defeasible estate is created when a condition is added on a fee simple estate. If the condition is met, the estate may be lost. And then there's a life estate, which is an interest in real property, which is held for the duration of a life of a designated person. It may be limited by the life of the person holding it or by the life of another person. This designated person is called a life tenant. That's super important to remember, a life tenant. A less than freehold estate, also known as a leasehold estate, is an estate held by one who rents or leases property. The key difference, super important here, the key difference between a leasehold estate and a freehold estate is the limitation of time. Now, there are four main types of leasehold estates, so I'm going to break those down. So there's the fixed term tenancy, or estate for years. There's the periodic tenancy, there's an estate at will, and then there's the estate at sufferance. So let's break those down. So first, the fixed term tenancy just refers to an estate that has a specific duration of time. Then there's the periodic tenancy, which is a leasehold agreement that specifies an initial period of tenancy and the length of the agreement, but does not end after the specified period. And then there's an estate at will, which means that it can be ended at any time. The term of this estate is indefinite. It's also important to note here that not all states recognize an estate at will, and ones that do, it varies in laws. And then lastly, there's an estate at sufferance. So an estate at sufferance arises when a tenant holds over the expiration of the term. All right, now let's talk about leases. So leases, what do we got to know about leases? So a lease is a contract by which one party conveys land, property, services, etc., to another for a specified time, usually in return for a periodic payment. A lease is a bilateral contract because both the landlord and the tenant have obligations to perform. Now, there are a few different types of leases that are going to pop up on your exam, and it's important to know how to distinguish them and understand them. So, the first one is a gross lease. Now, a gross lease is a rental agreement for the use of the property where the tenant pays a fixed amount which does not change as a result in changes of various expenses of the property. Then there's the double and triple net lease, which means 2 or 3 additional costs are added to the rent. That's pretty self-explanatory there. Next is a net lease, which is somewhat an undefined version of a triple or double net lease. This is more of like a flex option. Now then, there's the lease option, which is a lease with an option to buy, which again, that one, it is what it sounds. You can lease, but you do have an option to buy the property within a given time. And then lastly, the percentage lease, which pertains to commercial real estate. A percentage lease is a rental that is based on a percentage of a monthly or annual gross sales made on the property. And that's going to be it for leases. So yeah, hopefully you guys understood all that. Now we have to talk about deeds and title. Title is the legal concept of saying you own a right to some form of asset or interest. If someone has title, that means they have the right to own something like a house or a property. Title might sound like a document or a piece of paper, but it actually is not. I know, I'm going to blow your brains here, guys. It's just a legal concept. It's not a piece of paper. Now, as for deeds, deeds are a little bit different. A deed is a legal document that transfers title from one person to another, or the written proof of ownership for some form of asset or interest. So what does this mean? What does it mean? Well, deeds are the legal documents that transfer title. It is a written document itself that conveys ownership. Deeds must be in writing according to the statute of frauds and usually can be found in your county courthouse in which the property exists. Now, it's worth mentioning car titles and real estate titles are not the exact same topic. And this is the juicy stuff. This is what you've been waiting for. So I think this is why it's so confusing for some people, because when you hear of car titles, you think of a physical paper, but that's not the case with real estate title. That's why I think deeds and title get mixed up in real estate. Because yes, when it comes to car titles, there's a physical piece of paper, but that is not the case for real estate. So super important that you understand the distinction of that. So now we're going to cover public and private land use controls and government power. So the primary public land use control is, do you guys know? It's zoning. So the primary private land use control is deed restrictions or restrictive covenants. So it's as simple as that. So I'm going to say that one more time. The primary public land use control is zoning. The primary private land use control is deed restrictions or restrictive covenants. Hopefully that made sense. So deed restrictions and restrictive covenants, what do those do? Well, they limit what can be done on the property by the owner, while zoning is the regulation of public land use and development for local government. Speaking of government power or police power, let's talk about Pete. So do you guys know Pete? Hopefully. So there are many acronyms to remember for government powers, but I think the best one is Pete. So Pete, the P stands for police power, which again is zoning laws, building codes, fire codes, rent control, safety hazards, tenant rights, etc. They all play a part in police power in the areas of real estate. And then E is eminent domain. So this is a term used to describe the right of the government to take over privately owned real estate, usually despite the owner's wishes. T is for taxation. I think we all know what taxes are. E is for escheat. When a property owner dies and leaves no property documented inheritance plan, the property owner reverts to the government. Now, escheat ensures the property always has ownership. It's important to know that too. Next, let's talk about environmental law and real estate. So I know we're taking a little bit of a turn here, but yeah, that's just how we design this. So next, let's talk about environmental law. So you need to know three things. One, the different hazardous substances that exist. Two, the environmental laws affecting ownership. 3, the responsibility of sellers, landlords, and agents to disclose hazards to buyers/tenants. So here are the different hazardous substances you need to know. I'm not going to read over all of these again for the sake of time, but feel free to pause here and read them over if you'd like. As I was saying earlier, you need to know the environmental laws affecting ownership. So what laws are they? Well, let's talk about them. But before I do, it's time for another interactive activity. So answer the following. Which of the following enforces all federal environmental rules and regulations? CERCLA, SARA, the SDWA, or the EPA? So go ahead. I'll give you guys a couple seconds and come up with your answer. So do that now. All right, did you guys choose EPA? If you did, you are correct. Nice. So the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency, is the federal agency responsible for dealing with environmental issues. Now, the EPA was established in December 1970 by an executive order of the United States President Richard Nixon. The agency enforces all federal environmental rules and regulations. They're normally the enforcers of all these rules or laws that we're going to cover. All right, so let's get into these laws. All right, so there's the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation Liability Act, or CERCLA. And then there's the Superfund Amendments and Reauthorization Act of 1986, or SARA, or SARA. And then there's the Safe Drinking Water Act, or the SDWA. And then, of course, there's the Clean Water Act, or the CWA. And then lastly, the Residential Lead-Based Paint Hazard Reduction Act. Listen, you guys, you should be familiar with all these laws. If you're listening to them now and you don't know, you really, really need to know. Read up on all these laws, especially the last one. Now, remember, the majority of homes before 1978 used lead paint. That's a super important concept, and you will not only need to know that for your career, but for the exam. Which leads us to the last portion of this section. Let's talk about the responsibility of sellers, landlords, agents to disclose hazards to buyers and tenants. So for starters, it is the responsibility of sellers and agents to disclose any potential hazards to buyers or tenants. Not disclosing the information to a buyer can lead to severe legal repercussions and potentially you losing your license. So what exactly do you have to disclose? Well, that's where defects come in. Defects can be broken into two categories, material and latent. So a material defect is a problem with a property or any portion of it that would have significant impact of the value of the property or that involves a large risk to the people on the land. Now, a latent defect is not discoverable by normal inspection, but maybe not to the regular eye, but is known by the seller or homeowner. Now, a latent is obviously a less serious version of a material. However, as a real estate agent, normally it is your responsibility to disclose this information either way. Real estate agents are not usually qualified to determine how to fix a potential hazard, but they are qualified to know what the hazards are and to contact someone to help fix it. All right, next we have to talk about contracts. That's right, contracts. So this is a huge portion of the exam. So buckle up, sit tight. So real estate transactions revolve around written agreements that are called contracts. There are many different types of contracts. There's the listing agreement, which pertains to the real estate agent. Then there's the purchase agreement between a buyer and seller. And of course, a construction agreement, which is when a buyer agrees to build a certain type of house for a certain amount of money. Contracts come large and small. It's important to understand them all. Oh, I guess that rhymed there. So verbal contracts are sometimes called express contracts, and written contracts are called implied contracts. That's another important distinction and important thing to know that you need to know about contracts, because these terms come up all the time on the exam. So under the statute of frauds, certain types of contracts must be in writing to be enforceable in court of law. Contracts can also be classified by bilateral and unilateral. A bilateral contract is an agreement between two people or groups, while a unilateral contract is a one-sided agreement. Now, normally it's pretty clear to define which is which. However, if you can't remember, just remember bi stands for two or multiple, while uni stands for one. Simple as that. So In order for a contract to be valid, a few things must occur. One, the party must be 18 years or older and of sound mind. Two, a contract must be legal. For example, there cannot be a contract to kill, steal, or anything illegal. The contract must hold a clear consideration, which is a term usually associated with money, but can be anything of value, really. And then there must be a mutual consent of the contract. There must be an official offer and acceptance where both parties agree to the terms and conditions. Now, there are also a bunch of other contract clauses you need to know for the exam. For those of you who don't know, a clause just identifies a particular section of a real estate contract. Now, I'm going to tell you guys a few of my favorites that are most likely to show up on the exam. So here's the habendum clause. So the habendum clause is the statement in a contract that describes the rights and interests being given. It almost always begins with the words to have and to hold. And then there's the alienation clause, which is a provision in a mortgage or deed of trust signed with a lender that states that the borrower must pay the mortgage in full before the borrower can transfer the property. And then lastly, there's the defeasance clause. The defeasance clause is a required contract provision that ensures the title for the property is transferred to the buyer once the mortgage is fully paid off. Now, we do have a video on contract clauses. If that's something that you need help with, we could go ahead and link that down below as well. So check that out. Next, we have to talk about the single most important contract, the agreement of sale. Now, depending on where you live, it is referred to as a purchase agreement, agreement of sale, offer of purchase, earnest money agreement, or deposit receipt. Though they all sound different, they're all very much the same. Now, the purchase agreement is a legal contract that legally binds two or more parties together to specific obligations. They create a legally binding contract between the buyer and the seller. So, in plain terms, a purchase agreement is the document buyers and sellers sign with all terms and conditions of their transaction on it. A good example of a purchase agreement is when you order something online. Sometimes websites will ask you to sign or check a box that says terms and conditions. That's a purchase agreement. Most people don't normally read those, but truly should. Now, real estate purchase agreements are the same, but at a much larger scale. So the purchase agreement will cover a variety of topics, most notably the settlement date, the price of the property, the deposit amount, and of course, the personal property connected, like maybe a fridge or washing machine or anything the seller is leaving the house for the buyer. Now, the purchase agreement may also contain specific contingencies, like maybe the buyer wants the house, but only if it passes inspection. Next, we have to talk about mortgages. So this is a huge chunk of the exam. So let's get into it. So the official definition of a mortgage is a legal agreement by which a bank or other creditor lends money at interest in exchange for taking title of a debtor's property, with the condition that the conveyance of title becomes void upon payment of the deed. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Well, I'll get more into it. So a mortgage is a promise of property to a lender or to the lender as security of payment for the debt. So sometimes you'll see the borrower referred to as the mortgagor or the mortgagee, or the mortgagor, and sometimes you'll see to the lender referred to as the mortgagee. I actually just covered that in one of our daily question videos. Now, it's important to note that people will sometimes use the word mortgage and loan interchangeably. This is technically inaccurate, though. A lot of people do it, even though it's inaccurate, a lot of people do it. Even I do it sometimes. Mortgage is really a pledge of property as security, while a loan is something borrowed, usually money. This is a drastic difference, and while, in your career, you can use those terms interchangeably, sometimes people aren't going to, call you out on it. It's still important that you know the difference, because guess what? Comes up on the exam. So next, who qualifies for a mortgage? Well, to qualify, the lender is going to look at three things. One, the applicant's credit report and employment history. Two, the applicant's debt to income ratio. And then three, lastly, the property itself and how much it is appraised for at. So the bank or lender will look at these things to make sure applicants are the right fit for them. They want someone trustworthy with a history to prove they're financially responsible. They look at the property itself and the applicant's debt to income ratio to make sure the applicant can actually afford the property. Now, while we are on the topic of mortgages and loans, we have to talk about the types of loans out there. Here's a list of the most important. So we got the balloon loan, we've got the adjustable rate mortgage, we've got VA loans, and of course we've got FHA loans. Can you guys define any of these? Or better yet, can you try and define them all? Let's do another interactive challenge. Why not? So, which of the following is the loan available to military service members, veterans, and eligible surviving spouses? Go ahead. I'll give you guys a couple seconds. All right, did you guys choose VA loan? Hopefully. So let's define the rest. All right, so a balloon loan is a mortgage which does not fully amortize over the term. It is different as not all payments are equally divided, and the most substantial payments are called balloon payments. Then there's the adjustable rate mortgage, or ARM. It is a standard mortgage with a twist. An adjustable rate mortgage has flexible interest rate. Adjustable rate mortgages have a fixed period in which the initial interest remains the same. After that, the interest rate adjusts at a pre-arranged frequency. Where does that frequency come in? Well, typically that's going to be addressed on the contract, or depending on the mortgage broker or the lender, it's going to be how the market kind of affects and dictates the interest rate. Then there are FHA loans. So this is a mortgage issued by FHA approved lender and insured by the FHA, which is the Federal Fair Housing Act. Like there's multiple. No, there's just one. It's the Federal Fair Housing Administration. So FHA loans are sought after because they require lower minimum down payments, credit scores than many conventional loans. So FHA loans are great loans for first-time home buyers because of this, because they offer such lower minimum down payments and lower credit scores than many other conventional loans. That's important to distinguish because I can guarantee you, not only are you going to use these in your career, but this is going to show up on the exam. So now we have to talk about fair housing. So let's jump into fair housing. So being a real estate agent means you are representing someone. You are representing your agency, your clients, your city, your town, all that stuff. Representation is super important. So when performing your duties, you need to do it ethically and follow the law. If you break the law or do something unethical, it's simple. You'll fail as an agent and you'll likely lose your license. We will be covering the different laws real fast that pertain to housing, real estate agents, and buying and selling property. We're going to cover the big ones, which are prevalent to us, and of course, the ones that are most likely to show up on the exam. So the first one is the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and 1964. So the Civil Rights Act is a landmark federal legislation that prohibits the discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. The first act in 1866 was the law that prohibits any racial discrimination. You should know the distinction. The act grew and grew. Eventually today, it includes race, religion, color, sex, disability, children, nationality, and more. Now, these laws are fundamental to our society, and after the Civil Rights Acts were established, many other acts and laws were made, which leads us to the next one. So the next is the Fair Housing Act. So what do we need to know about the Fair Housing Act? Well, the Fair Housing Act is a law that prohibits the discrimination in the buying, selling, renting, or financing of housing. These laws prohibit discrimination based on race, religion, color, sex, disability, children, nationality, and more. The Fair Housing Act has been amended many, many times to add more clarifications on what is prohibited and what is not. Now, this is an important distinction, and I'm going to say this, so listen up. What is prohibited state by state varies. So some states, more things are prohibited than others. But federally, as I covered earlier, that's what's going to be covered. So I'm going to say it one more time. These things vary state by state. So it's important that you guys find out what it's going to be in your state in terms of what's protected and what's not. But federally, it's race, religion, color, sex, disability, children, nationality. And again, state by state, there are different ones, and they add more. But again, federally, those are the ones. Those are always going to be the core ones. So while we're on the topic of fair housing, we have to talk about antitrust laws. So antitrust laws are a collection of federal and state government laws that regulate the conduct and organization of business corporations, normally to promote fair competition for the benefit of its consumers. So in retrospect, antitrust laws protect the consumer and are healthy for a stable economy. And it's important to know and understand the ones that deal with real estate, as they directly relate to how you function as an agent and, of course, come up on the exam. So let's take a look at some antitrust violations. The first one is going to be price fixing. So fixing is the practice of selling the price of a good or service to make a particular price a standard. So in our terms, what does that mean? Well, in our terms, real estate fixing is when competing agents would meet up and agree on the same commission rates. Typically, agents set their commission rates depending on the price of the property. Any agreement, if it is just implied with other brokerages to set a standard commission rate, is a violation of antitrust laws. So let me break down a quick example of that for you guys. Imagine, this is actually, I'll give you guys a really good example. This was a known test question. So imagine you're going to a coffee shop and there's two real estate agents sitting at a table, and you're an agent yourself, and you overhear them talking about commission rates. And one of them asks you, hey, what commission rate did you just charge last year on that house, or whatever it might be? Well, even if it's implied, even if you give any sort of hint to anything, what your percentage is in terms of commission, that is a violation of the antitrust laws. So you guys have to be super careful when you guys do pass the exam, when you're out there, to not discuss those things, because it's a no, as they say, it's a no-fly zone. It's totally not allowed. But yeah, that is an antitrust violation that you need to know. Okay, another one is dividing territories. So this is when competing brokers agree to split territories and divide interests accordingly. So this would be, maybe you met up, let's use the coffee shop analogy again. Maybe you're at a coffee shop and there's a bunch of real estate agents and they're all drinking their coffee, and there's a big map on the table, and they're like, okay, listen, I'm only going to sell houses to this area, and you can only sell houses to this area. And they're like, okay, great. Well, why is this such a bad thing? Because if only real estate agents sold in certain areas, then they could dictate, again, what their commission could be, as well as maybe influence buyers and sellers to do things that are unethical. So that's dividing territories. And again, it is a clear antitrust violation. So the next is conspiracy to boycott. So this occurs when two or more persons or entities conspire to restrict the ability of someone from competing. Now, a good example of this is when a group of brokerages agree to take a listing because they may not support a company's political view. Now, this is super unethical and, again, highly illegal, and again, a antitrust or an antitrust violation. So the punishment for breaking any of these antitrust laws is severe. It can result you in a huge fine and even long-term imprisonment. And that's going to be it on antitrust laws and fair housing. And it looks like that's going to be it for our virtual real estate exam crash course. So we covered a lot. If you guys managed to follow along, congrats. You should be super proud. We got through a lot. I tried to jam in as much information as I could in under 1 hour. If you fully understand all this information, you're one step closer to passing a real estate exam. Of course, we honestly, we just really did scratch the surface. If you guys want to see more videos like this, leave a comment down below. Maybe we can turn this into a series where I just, lecture for 45 minutes, an hour, whatever it might be. But yeah, leave a comment down below. Tell me if you guys enjoyed this. and then we'll do it again next time. Now, if you guys want full access to our prep course, check out our website, realestatelicensewizard.com. There you can get full lectures, practice exams, and much more. Instead of just an hour or under an hour of content, we have 50 plus videos of content where I go much more in depth. Also consider checking out our videos on real estate exam vocab, our daily questions, all that stuff, everything here on the channel. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, make today magical. This is Zach from realestatelicensewizard.com. Have a great day.